anti-democratic practices. The ordinance is applied, at least by the historicals, through the use of oppression, slander, gossip, spying, reporting violations to the county for enforcement. They will report these anonymously or at least without any accountability to the accused. And now, most recently, by L.M. Smith, through implied threats of being burned out. New board members are told, contrary to what the ordinance actually says, that they are now responsible for spying out violations of the ordinance and for enacting punitive measures against those property owners they spy out. The ordinance is little more than a socialistic tool designed to reintroduce free-spirited Americans to the idea that well-written, clear, concise laws are not sufficient, but rather that they need other people to rule over them, that they should live in fear of what the government might do to them if they don't conform, and that neighbors are supposed to spy on one another and be in enmity with one another. Control is the name of the game played by the elite few who think the valley belongs only to themselves and that they alone have the proper vision for it. Unnecessary. Since the state of New Mexico has complete ownership of the important historically viable buildings, courthouse, Torreon, etc., and the National Historical Registry protects the other privately owned historically viable buildings, the county's ordinance is no longer necessary except to keep a few people feeling like they're preserving history, while those who pursue wealth, status, and power in Lincoln can enjoy the feeling that they're in control of the district. No one seems to care what the victims of this immoral system think or feel. Hypocritical. The people of Lincoln postulate and pose their love for Lincoln, but when a poor or otherwise disadvantaged person has difficulty completing a project which the board or various residents feels are necessary, no assistance whatsoever is offered. Instead, the person is oppressed with spying and reporting and threatened with punitive measures. It is widely recognized that people who offer no assistance to solving problems have no right to complain about the problems not being solved. Rights of the living and of the dead. The dead people of Lincoln have more rights to their property than do the living. The dead's properties are not permitted to be changed or modified, and the living's properties cannot be utilized or modified without board approval. The dead need only 12 square feet of real estate and make no demands regarding their rights. The living need much more than this and are given rights by their Creator that no mere mortal should abridge or remove without proper cause and due process. This is our American heritage, purchased with blood by so many of our ancestors, but now disdained and despised in Lincoln. There are two approaches to genuine historicity, dead and living. Dead history is what you see in almost all museums. No living person or creature is found in any of the exhibits. This is a valid way to display history because, after all, everyone involved is long dead. But Lincoln's historical districts include houses where living people are trying to survive, thrive, and get ahead in the present-day context. And not all of them are of the wealthy leisure class, nor do all these belong to what we have come to call the historicals. These other residents are mercilessly burdened with the requirement to support the Zone A tourist traps, and they receive no assistance, financial or physical, to ease the burden placed on them. There are a few historical districts around the country who have found a workable method to incorporate a living history into their display of their local history. But because Lincoln's historicity is mostly a deception to give a privileged few an economic advantage and an illusion of power and or purpose, Lincoln has no workable living history portion and instead has only an oppressive oligarchy that pits neighbor against neighbor. The Declaration of Independence also says that the main way to secure our rights of life, liberty, and happiness is that the government must derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, and then goes on to say that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. This, too, is as American values as it gets, and if there should be anyone watching this video who is not a fan of America's founding fathers, I encourage you to look again at what they wrote and what they accomplished. They built America from the ground up, and America has been, for almost 250 years, perhaps the greatest country this world has ever seen. No one watching this video can honestly put that on their resume. Maybe they know something you don't. As for us, 19 years in the oppressive environment of Soviet Lincoln has made us much more impressed with the Founding Fathers, with what they wrote and what they did. The Historical Board and Ordinance is a significant change from the original American principles, and it has been done in Zone B for a light and transient cause, the economic gain of a few elitists. The Historical Board and Ordinance, especially in Zone B, is an unjust government on multiple counts and requires removal. Zone B must be restored to its American heritage because it has no historicity to protect, and the board creates conflicts because it provides too great a hiding place for pettiness and control over one's neighbors. The voting majority of America has sent Donald Trump to Washington, D.C., in part to drain the swamp. Whether you agree with all that he says and does or not, his efforts to right the wrongs and ills of our nation with its bloated government, gross overspending, and divided loyalties are very commendable. But he is only one man. We cannot expect him to drain the swamp in his neighborhood if we won't drain the swamps in our own backyard. It will do no good to drain the swamps of the nation's capital if we won't drain the local swamps that feed and perpetuate it. The Historical Board and Ordinance is a swamp that has needed drained for a very long time. We as a family are here because it is our American duty to stand up against the tyranny and oppression that is the Historical Ordinance and Board, a duty that has carried many American patriots into far greater battles and that has demanded greater sacrifice than what we are doing now. Yet, for this reason, here we stand. Of course, we are asking for L.M. Smith's immediate removal from the Historical Board. We would hope that he will be permanently barred from holding such a position ever again. We had hoped that this matter would have already been on July 17's agenda, and we have great difficulty understanding why it is not. We also do not understand why we are prevented from freely speaking with any of the county commissioners, and it is called ex parte communications if we do so, but it is rather obvious that there is all sorts of behind-the-scenes maneuvering going on about our request to have Smith removed. Why are we gagged when no one else seems to be? One of the key remedies within the Historical Ordinance was that every resident could appeal any action of the board to the county commission. Has even that token remedy now been taken from us too? Then this truly is complete tyranny without representation. We simply believe that no one on the Historical Board, certainly not the chairman, should be talking about anyone's home being burnt down, and we see no possibility that the county can rightly sanction or even condone with silence threats of burning someone out being made by a county government official. In fact, the county's silence screams loudly that such threats, perhaps even acts of arson, are acceptable remedies in Lincoln County. This is a no-brainer to everyone we've talked to or who has heard about this. Nor is this just a one-time stupid remark made by Smith. When confronted, he repeated and defended his original statement about our house burning down, and that makes this a much more serious matter than any supposed one-time stupid remark. It is his insistence upon repeating his remark and his defense of it that is the deepest and most serious offense. This is not an isolated incident of stupidity. It is an exposure of serious attitudes that have no rightful place in any kind of housing situation. Anyone sick enough to say such a thing could very well be sick enough to do such a thing. And there are other questions about Smith's appropriateness for the board that ought to be re-examined and addressed. What exactly is the county saying by not putting this item on July 17th agenda, and instead have tried to have it resolved by the Historical Board? If you say that you cannot remove Smith, we can only conclude that at the least there is yet another gaping hole in the Historical Ordinance. If you say that you will not remove Smith, then you have already decided this matter without public debate. This is the basis of our difficulty in understanding why this matter is not an item on July 17's agenda. How can Smith be in charge of his own trial? Smith should, without question, be recused from the matter if this is to be resolved at the board level. At least one other of the board members, Winston Moore, should also be recused because of the recent personal conflict that has occurred between us and him as a result of these issues. Neither of these two board members are able to be fair, impartial, and objective about this matter. We were told that Reginald Ritchie was recently removed from the board. How was this accomplished? Why isn't the same action being taken in regards to Smith? What is different here? The identity and political stance of the victims? L.M. Smith, as was Reginald Ritchie, is only a symptom and not a root cause. That is, this conflict is the result of the structure of the ordinance, and this is not just because of Mr. Smith's disagreeable personality, though that is certainly a factor that needs addressed. Our experience and observation is that the amount and level of conflicts in the historic districts rise and fall based on who is on the board, especially who is the chairman. This is wrong. The quality of life for Zone B residents should not depend upon or even be impacted by who is on the Historical Board. Feudal lordship went out a long time ago. Many residents choose to ignore this aspect of life in Zone B, but they know it is wrong, even as they know they can't do much about it. They might not even understand it or be able to explain it. This kind of thing will happen again and again and again, because Lincoln's historical ordinance is not built upon the principles of liberty that made our nation great, but rather upon darker things like the fear of losing something from a dead past, and upon the need to keep out those nasty little poor people who might move into the district, and upon the desire to control someone else's property. No good law can ever be built on these things. If past history is any indicator, we're sure some people from Lincoln have been emailing or calling you, practicing character assassination about us, and informing you about this situation. But you should know that not a single one of them has bothered to talk to us even once now that we are standing up against both Smith and the ordinance. Do the historicals now condone arson as a solution to the district's problems? This is completely consistent with the progression of the Nazi and Soviet elites who used their dupes to consolidate their power. Is someone trying to hush this all up now because keeping control is much more important than whether or not a county bureaucrat threatened one of those nasty little poor people who have somehow infested the district? Or is justice in the historical districts really reserved only for the historicals and those who toe their party line? We believe too much of this is true. Further, we are standing alone now because we have not asked any of our true neighbors to stand with us. We do not wish them to be needlessly targeted for petty reprisals by the board. Too many of them are the poorer of the district, and they're too busy with real life and aren't able to stand up to the historicals. We are in that same boat, but since the historicals, or at least their chairman, is now threatening to burn us out, we don't have much choice but to stand up and speak out against what they do. We are fighting for our home, our family, and even for our lives. What are the historicals fighting for? When I was talking with Nita Taylor about all this, we got around to the fact that my wife and I had bought our property knowing it was in an historical district. She gave us an example of the kind of people who buy a house on a dirt road and then begin to demand that the county pave the road for them. That doesn't quite fit our situation. We're more like the people who, after researching old documents and discovering true property lines, we want the county to give us back our front yard where the county paved the road in the wrong place. For all these reasons and more, in addition to asking for L.M. Smith's immediate removal from the Historical Board, we also ask the County Commission to reopen the question of whether Zone B rightly belongs under the Historical Ordinance, a question that has always been contested since the inception of the ordinance and which has only been marginally voted down each time it has come up. We are open to any reasonable public discussion of this matter. We'll even do a public debate with the Historicals if you'll moderate, Mr. Stone, and the rest of you commissioners will attend. Just bring a squad of deputies because it might get ugly, but not from us. But no, we cannot be silent about all the abuse and oppression that occurs in the district any longer. Thank you. From Neil, Cindy, and all the Girrards living in Soviet Lincoln. P.S. to the county commissioners, you have incredibly limited public input in your commission meetings. Certainly there should be restrictions, but there should also be situation-specific exceptions to this 3-minute gag rule. Maybe you need 2 meetings per month with less on the agenda and expanded time for public input and opportunity when the matter is actually being debated, especially when individuals are personally involved in the question. This is still a democracy.